Welcome to Drop Everything Podcast number 17. I'm your host, Dan Holzman, and today we have a very special guest, one of the most successful jugglers of all time, a good friend of mine, Mark Nizer. But before we get to the interview, let's thank our sponsor, the IJA, International Jugglers Association. Information about this great group of jugglers can be found at juggle.org. Now sit back, drop everything, get ready to listen to the wit and wisdom of Mr. Mark Nizer. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Mark Nizer.
Hello, people.
Mark Nizer, now, I was talking to you before the podcast started about sharing a very special time in, I believe, the history of juggling. A golden time I like to call the 80s.
But let's go back first before we jump into the 80s. You mentioned that I was your idol. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Well,
the unblemished goat that you mailed me is fantastic, by the way. I appreciate you bringing that by.
I think as far as somebody who's had a great run through the history of juggling, at least in my time, who seems to have always stayed busy, always stayed current, always stayed motivated, and really at the top of the field, only one guy comes to mind, and that name is Mark Nizer.
I love the way you say it like a brand, too. It feels good.
And we had guys who were hot for a while and then fell away. Like the name Edward Jackman comes to mind.
Oh, the greatest ever.
You know, his name comes up a couple of times, and I think the people who knew him, and knew him especially through the IJA, he's a very big image, a very strong character in our lives as jugglers. But to a lot of people, he's a mystery man. Like, who's Edward Jackman?
Right. And to me, he was initially just this blow-away juggler to me, and then, you know, a mentor, and then a partner, and a friend, and at the same time, you know, a terrifying force to be reckoned with that I had to babysit, spoon feed as well. So it was a mixed bag. But I do love Edward, and I would love to. You got to get the two of us on the podcast together. That would be a great moment.
You know, I've tried to reach out to him a couple of times. I would say we were friendly, that we were friends, I guess, but that we were never guys who really did much friendship outside of the circle of juggling.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly if you have any ins with him, I don't know anybody who's really even talked to him.
Yeah, I can't find him.
Yeah. I talked with his wife a few years ago, and she seemed happy and seemed like she thought that Edward would talk to me, but then not able to finish the deal there. But maybe a great person to talk to. When was your first IJA convention?
My very first IJA convention was 1979. And in Amherst, Massachusetts, and my brother and I drove there from Concord, which is about 2 hours away. I'd been juggling, I'm going to say, maybe 2 years.
Okay.
At which point I'd convinced myself that I was pretty sure I was the world's greatest juggler at that point. And I walked into that gym with a swagger that has never been matched. Just like, yeah, I got this. And I walk in, there's Peter Davidson doing head roll. Blew my mind. Next to him is Edward. Who knows what he was doing? Whether with the low five clubs with those short handled Europeans, or maybe he was just doing 5 balls or something. Blew me completely off the map, and yet I still competed in the championships. Just completely deluded that I still was some sort of force to be reckoned with. I'd love to know if anyone remembers my performance at that event. I don't think there's any record of it, and I'm going to leave it at that instead of exposing myself to some...
Well, you're lucky because that was the year before I attended. My first convention was 1980.
Well, I can guarantee you that you wouldn't be interviewing me right now had you attended the 1979 Juggling Championships.
Was the format basically the same? Because for a while they had it sort of broken down into more like individual categories. And then it became more of what we know today as the current championships. In 1979, was it a stage competition?
Well, it was in the gym, but it was still a team acts, solo stuff. I don't think there was a junior category, which is why I was automatically in. Because I guess I was still quite young. I guess I would have been like 14 probably. I didn't lose. I didn't get last place, I might add. I beat Dave Finnegan.
Okay.
And that's pretty good. That gives you some street cred taking care of that guy. He didn't juggle though in his performance. He just talked a bunch. So
right.
I still crushed it.
Well, he's lucky he went on and was able to overcome that and become the Professor Confidence that we know him as.
Well, he's an inspiration to me. We used to joke around about Jugglebug and all that, but if you look at the breadth of this guy's work and his amazing parenting, his skepticism and taking the BS out of stuff, I really have admired him over the years, and to this day, he's still passionate and still teaching and sharing the message.
Well, it's interesting the way people who have carved their niche in juggling, the different ways we've seen people do it. It's not all been the sort of Albert Lucas, Dick Franco mold that you and I had looking at when we started, which was, you become this type of juggler that works your Vegas shows, who has this sort of high quality circus oriented 8-9 minute act. Where guys like Finnegan or Carlo, the person who wrote the juggling book I learned from,
Me too.
neither
First,
one was what you would call strong jugglers.
Well, it's funny, you mentioned the Vegas route. That was my total goal. I was inspired really by Barrett Felker coming to my school with the Harlem Globetrotters, and that was my entire motivation, was to become a Harlem Globetrotter juggler. He even came to the gym where I practiced in New Hampshire Hall there, and there's my idol doing 5 club back crosses on the same space that I practice in, and gave me sort of that, oh, this is possible kind of vision. And that became the fire in my pants, that I was going to do this no matter what. And both you and I, ironically, you met my wife before I did in Aruba doing a review show down there. So you were on the Vegas route as well. And I ended up doing that, I guess, for like 5 years. Atlantic City, Montreal, the CAFCON for a year.
You were at the Travel Plaza too. That was
the last one we did. My wife said I can't take it anymore, and basically moved to New York and said, "You can come with me if you want." And I followed her.
Well, that was something people don't, the modern jugglers really don't know much about. Was when we started, like you would go to Las Vegas, you go to one of these gambling meccas, and up and down the strip in Vegas, there'd be these review shows, and the format was really sort of variety acts and topless or scantily dressed dancers. And the variety acts would basically fill time while they changed the sets, changed
That's right.
clothing. So every show had 4 or 5 variety spots. So you go to
Right.
Vegas, you see 5 or 6 jugglers, and then you go home and practice, and you think, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be
12 minutes.
I'm going to do my Albert Lucas or my Dick Franco or
Yep.
Chris Cremo. And so you said you learned to juggle from the book by Carlo. So did
Well,
you learn
that
to
was
juggle in
my-
like 74?
That was my first book.
Okay.
My mother signed myself, my twin sister, and my brother up for a juggling class in 7th grade. It was adult education, but they made an exception, let us in. And so I learned from Hemlock, who was a Ringling Brothers clown. He somehow had either a layover or a hiatus between jobs, and he taught us in some kind of, I think, a high school classroom.
Okay.
3 balls, I got lacrosse balls, and very quickly knew this is what I needed to quench the overstimulated brain.
Now, I have a couple of questions about this. First of all, Ringling Brothers would allow a clown named Hemlock. Like,
That is shocking. He
everybody
did
pick
die
your deadly
though,
poison to
during
name
class.
yourself after. Let's
He
see.
did die. Yeah, and I didn't drink the graduation beverage.
We got Cyanide, we got Hemlock. And so whose idea? So you said you had some siblings. Were you the one that motivated this? Was this purely motivated by your mother, or who had
I think
the
my
juggling
mother
bug?
was sick of us just
Okay.
coming home from school and all this energy. I'd love to. We should get her on here and find out the real reason I was sent off on this thing.
Right.
I had no interest in it and no knowledge of what it even was, but as soon as it clicked, that first 3 ball thing, and you get that sort of gray matter turned on and the endomorphines going off, and I knew this was something special. And I very quickly became obsessed with all the tricks. And my brother and sister both can pass clubs and that kind of thing, but it did become sort of an obsession for me.
And how'd you get your early influences? I mean, you say you were in New Hampshire?
Yeah, I grew up in Massachusetts, so I would kind of see the first group I ever saw live was Fantasy Jugglers
Okay.
down in Faneuil Hall. I don't know if you remember them.
Lana and Don Reed?
That's very good. Very good. Yep. And they were passing Stu Reynolds fiberglass and moving back and forth and doing a chase. There was another third guy in there too.
They had a drummer, I think.
There was another,
Tall
yeah.
guy.
Yep, with glasses and curly brown hair.
I never saw them because that was an East Coast thing. I think I'd seen them at a Jugglers magazine.
Yep.
Certainly
But they
remember
were
the name.
they were it, man. And then Dario Patoir.
Mhm.
and he did a one-man show. He and I became friends. I really admired him. Very tall and classy, and had this sort of beautiful movement about what he did. And then Slap Happy, so
Okay.
Alan Jacobs.
Right.
I remember first time I ever, quote, performed was I went to Boston Commons with a friend of mine, Gibby Galis. He could play, what did he play? I don't even, was it the accordion? I think it was the accordion. So I juggled, he played the accordion, and it was the music stand. I remember that blowing over, and we had no idea what we were doing. Of course, 50 yards away is Slap Happy, killing, making money hand over fist down there. And I just looked over in bewilderment, couldn't get my head around it.
But you were inspired by the street performers of that generation.
That's all I'd seen.
Okay.
And then, well, we had the magazine,
Right.
the little newsletter that was stapled together. I remember seeing a picture of, I think was it Barrett doing 5 clubs? And it had mentioned that Steve Mills had broken the record for 5 clubs. That was 1 minute and 15 seconds or something. And I was convinced that it was a print error, that they'd meant 5 balls, that there was, because there's no way you could do 5 clubs.
Right, over a minute.
Right. And then I saw the picture of Ignatov, I guess is the correct pronunciation. And that just went up on my wall. And eventually in college, I went to a professor from Boulder, came to UNH to teach. And then he said he knew me from the juggling club. And he said, hey, why don't you come with me to Boulder? We'll do a street performing act together. And then I met Barrett, and Barrett had already come to my school, but then he was there, and Peter was there, and Air Jazz was there, so John Held and Kazaya, John Leffingwell, Kit Summers was there sometimes, and I was just surrounded by this high-quality jugglers, all better than me, and yet welcoming. Who would invite you to come and want you to be in a place where you're taking their money?
And that was certainly part of the creme of the jugglers back then.
Oh,
certainly Peter Davidson's another seminal figure of a juggler who was just sort of out of his time. It's like, how did he get so much better than the rest of us?
Yeah. Well, he was an Edward. It was Edward and Peter in L.A.
Mm-hmm.
He came from L.A. So he and Edward and Daniel Rosen were all kind of in that Westwood group.
Yeah.
That were really a firestorm of talent. But practicing behind Peter, I really wasn't even close to this understanding of what he was doing and the amount of time it would take. And to be standing directly behind him, watching him do that perfect 3-ball routine or the beautiful head rolls, the perfect 5-ball routine, which throw for throw, no doubt. It just really set that bar so high that some people go to the precipice, and the overwhelming practice it's going to take to become great makes you just step back and go, you know what? I think I'll go become a minister, or you change your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I saw it and I wanted it more than anything. So I started showing up long before anyone else got there. And I would already be 2 hours in when other people would arrive, and I would stay later just because I wanted to get close to this kind of quality that these guys had. And that's the only way I knew how to do it, was just put in the time, because I was never like a natural or anything. I just practiced more than everybody else.
Yeah, it's funny how these scenes pop up around a certain pitch. You're talking like Boulder, Colorado had, was the Pearl Street Mall?
Yep.
And
yep.
So you got a lot of timings. I remember seeing you in San Diego.
Right, that was after that. I ended up going back to UNH, but then heard of this exchange program to San Diego, and Kit told me about it actually in Boulder. He mentioned he was just leaving San Diego to come to Atlantic City for his fateful performances there, and mentioned you should go to San Diego, Balboa Park. They have a great place to street perform, because he was kind of giving me kind of a heads up that he had this spot that was so great, and let me know that it was there. So when I had the chance to go to school there and kind of finish my degree, I just, first weekend there, went to Balboa Park, started street performing, and I don't think I missed one weekend except for the 1984 Vegas convention.
Well, it was a nice pitch. I mean, it's funny how it certainly
You performed there.
Oh,
me
and Barry would come down from Los Angeles.
Yep.
And they had some kind of draw, I think, where you got up really early in the morning.
Yeah, you had to get your permit. Initially, we could kind of just get them, and it was us, and it was kind of set up. But then eventually they made it, you basically had to sleep in the park
to
get the permit. I eventually became friends with a bunch of the homeless people, and I just had, quote, a partner that would sleep out for me. So that was near the, after 5 years. I think the last 2 years I didn't have to sleep out. But the competition was so stiff, you had to get there at like, you'd finish work, you'd go eat dinner, you'd take a shower, and you had to go back and lay down in front of the door to get the permit.
And then you also teamed up with Edward Jackman there in San Diego.
Yeah, initially, my partner, I worked alone, and then I would often share with people, whoever were kind of coming by. There was a dancer that at one point that came by and shared with me. There was Ray Wald was my very first kind of San Diego partner, and we had a great time. Do you know Ray?
Yeah, he went on to work with Cirque du Soleil.
Really?
Yeah, the fire juggler, Ray Wald.
Yeah. Well, he when I knew him, he had just gotten out of the circus and was very clownish, was really into hats and cigar boxes and balancing. And then we did a team act together and had a good time. And then we also would just switch off and do our own individual shows. And he left. I don't remember where he went.
Well, the interesting story about Ray is that, so at one point he decided to set everything on fire. Like that was going to be his gimmick.
I remember just thinking the permit paperwork on that's got to be crazy. But, and he was always so sooty. He's got to be dead from cancer, right?
No. So this is the story.
Call me, Ray. Call me.
Yeah, Ray, if you can hear this with your one good ear, give Mark a shout out. But the story I heard was that the show O in Las Vegas, the Cirque show, with the giant lake that's built into the stage and everything.
Right.
That initially the idea was that it was going to be fire and water, like not just water show, but a fire and water show. So they wanted to have this character who would represent fire, and that Ray Wald was going to be this character that represented fire and basically be the star or the co-star of the show, as fire.
Okay.
And then as the show progressed, as the direction of the show progressed, the idea of the water became more and more to the forefront, and to the point where he has like one crossover where he sits in a chair and his whole chair is engulfed in flames, and that became like his almost entire role in the show. But the contract was from the time they thought he was going to be basically the co-star of the show. So he had a very good run, even though he ended up not doing that much.
Wow.
So I think he's still there, from what I heard.
Really?
Yeah. So he had one of the sweetest gigs in juggling. It's funny how some guys end up with these jobs. Like Mike Godot comes to mind.
Right. Can you imagine?
Who ended up opening for Lance Burton for. It's so funny the way I said Lance Burton, because I had this cat, and we named the cat Lance Burton. so I have trouble because he was wearing a tuxedo. He was a little tuxedo cat. So I have trouble whenever I say Lance Burton.
But, he's doing a 12-minute show for, what was it, a 10-year run he did?
Yeah, I think he did the entire Lance Burton run, because he helped Lance put it together.
And then he and Penn Jillette ended up doing the Bull Boot show.
He became a writer and producer and on the radio show, and another guy who's had a wonderful career, being in the right place at the right time, having a good act, and just being a steady professional performer.
Yeah. And
like you mentioned Kid Summers earlier before, because Kid Summers, you're talking about this fateful trip he had in Atlantic City. He was another original mold of these comedy jugglers. Like him and Mark Nizer, who were great jugglers, good-looking guys, seemed to have a good instinct for comedy already and for what it took to be professional jugglers. Where they learned all that, I'm not sure, because they were a little bit ahead of us ahead as myself, as far as the development as professionals.
Well, it's funny. Kit had his act already developed when he was heading to Atlantic City. I was very apparently according to my mother, I was never funny. And in Boulder, we kind of had a script. Alan Streeter is the guy that I worked with. We had a script. We actually competed in the teams in Ohio as well. We were called Anti-Gravity.
Okay.
And we wrote a show like around the kitchen table with like poetry and all this sort of very strange. I remember doing diving forward roll on a bed of nails.
Oof, okay.
I mean, this crazy, and we're wearing, red spandex pants. And so I never really even understood the funny part until kind of watching Air Jazz. And then when I went to San Diego and working the park, I was kind of just doing the pick and choose kind of comedy writing where you just kind of take stuff that you heard was funny and now it's in your show. And luckily, Ben Decker got a hold of me very early on. We were juggling together, and he said, Mark, what are you doing, man? And he threw me in his car, drove me to San Francisco, watched, I'm going to have to get on, I may miss some names here.
Sure.
Butterfly Man, Was Michael Davis up there then?
Michael Davis, perhaps at the Cannery or the Anchorage.
Yeah. So we went to the Cannery. We went everywhere to all three venues there. Watched all the acts with Ben kind of sitting next to me, whispering and sort of nodding and explaining. See, this is why it's funny, and see how he's written his own joke, and just took the time to kind of make me understand that this is a whole nother creative part of it and find this passion. And on the way back in the car, I wrote my very first joke. A lot of people don't like me because I'm a ham and they're Jewish.
Well, it stands the test of time.
Yeah, it's still hilarious.
It's still being a joke. It's still being a...
Yeah. But once I understood that
Right.
you could make something that is your own and have it not just be juggling, that also be the funny part. Because, juggling, we're not really inventing new tricks all the time, but it's really how you present it. And the pride of having it be your own thing and your own idea was very, very appealing to me. And I will never be able to repay Ben for that sort of guidance. I still see people now that take that shortcut where they just need an act, they grab the pieces of the words, and then it's a show, and then that's it. It's 30 years later. They think it's theirs at that point, but it's been lost.
And sometimes you can recognize people like that by their prop bag. Like if you go to a street festival and you see a team, and the team has 7 clubs and 6 torches and 2 high unicycles.
Right.
You go, okay, I pretty much know what that show is going to be. It's going to be the build-up from 1 to 7 with the clubs, 10 minutes getting on the unicycles,
Right.
and then the passing. But no, there were guys, I remember watching you and Edward, and one of my favorite routines was one of you played the hunchback.
Edward did.
Is that Edward?
Yeah.
And you were doing some sort of cigar box stack. And
Yeah, and I did the cigar boxes, and yep. The thing with Edward is we had a show. We just got bored doing our solo show is what happened. So we ended up kind of just teaming up and doing a show for a while, which really was basically Edward's old team show with Daniel Rosen,
mm-hmm.
with me kind of replacing Daniel, right? But that seemed yucky, and he kept calling me Daniel by accident. It was very frustrating. And one day he just said, "Hey, let's just stop and do a new show." And this is where my relationship with that Edward just became magic. I give him the credit because I don't think I had the chops or the knowledge or the foresight to kind of be able to guide and form this thing. But between the two of us screwing around, we made a brand new show that I'm sure was very rough around the edges. We wore these little blue gas station attendant outfits, and it was just really fun and really unique. That's where the Hunchback came from. We did some really stupid stuff, some really interesting stuff. There was a trick where he laid on his back with his legs sticking up in the air, and I would run up and jump on his feet. So he's laying on his back, and he would juggle, I think he juggled 3 balls, and then I juggled standing on his feet facing down at him, and then I had these 3 bouncy balls, and I would throw and bounce it off his face, and he would knock it back up to me again.
You bounced it off his face.
Right, so he's laying on his back, looking straight up with his feet 90 degrees, pointing straight up in the air. Okay. And I'm standing on the bottom of so the soles of our feet are touching.
I see. So you're going around his face, like on the ground.
No, I would literally be juggling 3 balls, and I would turn and throw one like I was doing a force bounce on the ground. But it would hit him in the forehead, and he would knock it back up to me.
There's
it wasn't every one or anything. It was just every once in a while.
I see. It's still pretty funny, though.
And we did a thing where we exchanged just a vest, but we thought we were being very creative. I'd never done any of this stuff, so who knows? He was probably just lifting things from everyone else he's ever seen. And since it was new to me, I thought he was a genius.
Now, did you have some sort of plan for your career, or at what point did you decide, okay, because up to this point it seems a bit haphazard. You went here, you went there, as far as sort of following these different muses, these different influences. Did you then sort of take control and say, I need to have a path, or what was your career sort of vision at that point?
Initially, I just wanted to be a really good street performer. I became so into it and obsessed with watching that sort of hat number increase. And I didn't know I was making more than I'd ever seen, as a kid. Was independent, didn't need money for school or rent or anything. And that kind of seemed really interesting to me, but because of San Diego, I started to get a following, and people would ask me to come to a corporate event. and this and that, and I started to clean up a little bit, but I was always kind of learning, practicing with music as well, kind of imagining that transition. I did some college gigs with Ben Decker. He used to have a juggling night or something at UCSB. I did some of those. Those were just so much fun. And then I did the Vegas Championships. I got second from that. I can't remember where oh, and I know what it was. I did that, the American Collegiate Talent Showcase in college, which was basically a contest run by this amazing woman named Mother Hubbard, Barbara Hubbard, out of Las Cruces, New Mexico. And she started this thing to sort of give college students a launching pad into the professional performing market. So she would put me in front of, so I competed in this contest. The first year I got second place. I won the second time I did it. And part of the prize was to tour, USO tour. So I got to meet Bob Hope. I got to go all over Micronesia.
Right.
On helicopters and just went everywhere, had a great experience. And then after I won the second time, I got some money. They put a scholarship at my school and got a good video with me with Bob Hope and Mary Hart on this television show. And that's how I got my first review show, was submitting that tape to the review show and got that. The funny thing is, and then the opening night of that show, a different producer was there that was leaving, Miller Reish, I don't know if you remember them. And he had seen me, and so he hired me after that run was over. Ironically, at that show, which was at Lily Langtry's in Pennsylvania, the production manager just really didn't like me for some reason. He was my roommate as well, and had decided for some reason that I was, all I cared about was being perfect and juggling and being funny, and I gave it everything. That's all I thought about all day long. And he accused me of dropping on purpose, just to sort of mock him, to show that I could still do well. It was this very strange,
You overcome the drops? You did them intentionally?
It was like a personal attack on him.
Right.
And he would say, "Hey, Mark, stop it. Don't drop this show."
Okay.
Which, of course,
yeah,
I think anyone that juggles knows what that'll do.
It's not really something you have control over in a show-to-show.
Well, now you're a shaky mess.
Yeah.
You're overthinking every single catch. And it was traumatizing. And this whole show was on plastic ice, so the whole ground was sprayed with silicone oil. So it was completely slippery because there was an ice show. So I'm in regular jazz shoes on plastic ice doing my act, and he basically told me that I was fired, and you're pretty much done. This will be your last week. Just got to do press night. Press came, and I just did my best and just said, okay, I guess I'm done. And I was very traumatized, very upset and sad. And the reviews came out, and they loved my act. They just great reviews. He was fired.
There you go.
And so I got to do the run, and I was kind of given a second win there. But it was scary, just knowing that one person could have that much kind of control over you.
And I remember your review show act. You had definitely some elements, like you say, of juggling to music, of that other style of juggler as well. Because there was a pretty strong division at that time between sort of the comedy jugglers and the technical jugglers. And Edward kind of crossed over a little bit, but you definitely also crossed over and sort of helped to create this sort of new mold, which is sort of the Ivan Purcell, Josh Horton, great juggler, comic kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Because you definitely had some elements of some very strong juggling in your show.
Yeah, I still like the music part. I think it was a good way to kind of break the ice in some ways. I can see that you certainly want to be updating your music over time so that things still have some pow to them. But I think the comedy is definitely what makes it more than juggling, because juggling can become very boring quickly if it's just juggling. However, great juggling with music can also be captivating. So I still do both, even though I might be a little slower in my old age here.
Well, I think also for the theatrical performing you do, your ability to go into performing arts theaters and sort of move into that realm, that juggling to music does have more of a certain artistry. There's been very few straight comedy jugglers who've been successful doing theater or doing, in the long run.
Right, and how do you fill a big stage being one person? How do you make it more than a guy standing on stage juggling ping pong balls in his mouth? That's small. That's really small, and it's too small. So you really want to find a way to make that thing become an event. And that is where I really learned that by doing these review shows to see how important lighting was and the drummer and the music, and you watch the production show, how they really carefully use the lighting. And then I ended up doing college gigs for 20 years in there, where you'd show up in a hallway one day, the next day you'd be in a theater, but nobody knew how to turn the lights on or do a blackout. I remember one gig in a cafeteria, they had the terrible ceiling speakers, and I was, oh no, do you have any other speakers? And they sort of point to the closet, and there's a brand new giant sound system in there, still in the boxes, never been taken out of it. And they sort of just, well, if you know how to hook it up, we could use it. I'm like, are you kidding me? So grabbed it. I didn't know how to hook it up. Got that thing out there, fired it up, figured out how to get it together, and it rocked the house. So just by trial and error and fire, I learned that all I tried to do was get to every venue, no matter how crappy it was, and make it as much as it could be. I remember one theater got there, and in the summer they had torn out all the lights. Not just all the lights, all the lights. There was no lights on stage, there was no lights in the theater. There was a spotlight in the back, and that was it. Are we going to cancel the show? What are we going to do? And I told all the kids to go back to their dorm rooms and get their desk lamps. And we daisy-chained them all together and put a big ring of desk lamps all around me on stage. And I did a show surrounded by desk lamps.
Now, you were also sort of in the heart of the college performing years. That was the venue me and Barry unfortunately bypassed. But like you said, there was a good 20-year period where we used to have in the Jugglers magazine sort of a listing of where people were performing.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd look at that. That would be how you sort of update yourself on where the other performers were. And you were just knocking down colleges one after another. So from the review shows, did you make a conscious intention to say, okay, that's the next step, colleges?
Yeah, my wife was just burned out on the review business. I would still be doing that right now if it wasn't for her. So we moved back to Manhattan, where she had an apartment. I started street performing again to kind of get back my long show. And then I met a friend of mine, Charlie Mount, who was a fantastic comedian and did this weird 12 Days of Christmas mime thing, which was really hilarious. And he was a good friend of hers. And he said, hey, you should get into the college market. That's what he'd been doing. And so the college agency sent me out to SUNY Old Westbury out in Long Island. Mm-hmm. The toughest gig in the world. I mean, to this day, the toughest gig ever. Basically, if he could do this, he could do anything, and threw me to the wolves out there.
So you had a trial by fire.
Being tough. I remember people throwing beer bottles at me during the show.
Right.
But I got through it. It was fun. It was fine. It was pretty good. And then they took me into the college market, and Edward had already plowed the road for us. He was a phenomena there. Mm-hmm. Absolutely amazing. And I came in on his coattails because he had already come in and just crushed the venue. Everyone was just amazed by what he was doing. He was funny. He had the whole package. And there was definitely room for more people. And I was ready. I had the material, had the time, had kind of the passion to do it. I was young. These little pieces all had to come together at just the right moment. And I was right there. Now I'm way too old. People, they don't want... I look out in a college crowd now, and I'm older than the fathers of the kids that are in college.
Now, you won a couple of the College Performer of the Years. Were those a big deal, and did they basically just skyrocket your bookings for the following years?
No, colleges are when I was doing it, it was more about having an amazing showcase. So you would really go through a lot of trouble to have a great video, which I still think is the very most important tool to have to get jobs. Absolutely killer video quality and great edit, great venue, very important. So I had a great video. Mm-hmm. I did, and I would get these showcases, and these college kids would all be there, and they'd see hundreds of shows. But if you had, again, that right combination, and I had been doing review shows for so long that at least my 12 minutes was super tight, and I could go out and be pretty strong. When you're doing 12 shows a week under high pressure, a college showcase seems like nothing. And that's really how I got all those gigs.
And do you think there is sort of an age ceiling? I mean, do you still showcase in that market, or do you just get jobs sort of that are still Mark Nizer You're up to
Yeah,
your
I don't.
perennials.
I do parents' weekends now, and occasionally I'll still put myself out there, but I think I'm really past that for some reason. I'd say I probably still do a couple a month. For parents' weekend, I'm perfect for that. And I could still do a college gig, and they are still my favorite audiences of all the audiences I perform for because you have total freedom to do and say whatever you want, no editing. Tough venue and a tough crowd, but they are so tough that they make your comedy very strong because you can't just have this safe stage performance. I think a lot of people suffer from stage safety,
Hmm.
do the safe show and they go, well, thank you. And they're not feeling the risk of having to be serious, very funny. But with a college gig, where you're in a tough situation, often very few people, you have to drop this pretension and be real and be absolutely in the moment, kind of like a street performer, and that's when you become their friend and they like you, and that's when the show succeeds, is when you stop when you stop being a performer and become a person. Very tricky skill to have, and to be honest, right?
Well, it's also I think the start of this whole new school attitude that came up with us in the '80s, where a lot of the jugglers or vaudeville performers before us were what you would call shticky. Sort of
Right,
had that sort of phony show business gloss,
right,
where they weren't being successfully transitioned to these new venues that weren't review shows, where the audience was definitely expecting more a longer presentation. You couldn't quite be as canned, and you had to sort of be a little edgier, but yet at the same time always understanding that nobody wants or hasn't seemed to want it, a dirty juggler.
right. And I had college gigs where they'd say, can you please be dirty?
Right.
It's very strange. And other gigs where I looked out and I was like, oh, it's a college crowd, perfect. And I always mention to clients beforehand, I say, hey, is there anything you want to tell me about the group? And no, have a great time. And you go out and you think it's a college gig, and it's a very conservative. The one in particular I'm thinking of was a very conservative religious school, and they were completely freaked out back in the day. I mean, my show, I've made it's quite harmless now, but
Well, I think it's a good place for a juggler to come from, this idea that we don't want to be a family show per se, in that if you put us in the situation where we're a family entertainer, it's not going to work because they're expecting a more adult type of show. But certainly to have a show that's family yet adult, it doesn't have to be dirty per se. It's just
right.
your character has to be more relatable as a real person who relates to real things like an adult and not some kind of weird show business cardboard cutout.
And to have a show that can cover all those bases at the same time. And that's where I really think, because I've been doing performing arts centers exclusively for so long now, I can come in and kind of cover little kids to grandparents and all the ages in between, and everyone's going to find something that's going to be, wow, that really reached me. And so I'm not expecting everyone to laugh at this or that, but hopefully each group finds the funny in their range. And some stuff, the best stuff, works on many levels all at the same time. So each person thinks they're getting the joke, but it's actually different jokes.
I got a nice comment where someone came up to me and said my show reminded them of a Pixar movie where people were enjoying it on different levels. Like some of the
Yeah.
references, they weren't dirty, but the adults were really appreciative that I included them
Yeah.
in sort of the narrative of the show.
Hmm.
So, what about the sort of inspiring juggler, someone who's looking at this sort of evolution of your career? What was your practice like? I mean, did you ever, like you say, you were pretty obsessive about it? What was sort of over the course of these years, what was sort of the practice regime like?
I wonder if I practiced too much now. I remember practicing in Balboa Park every day, Monday through Friday, very long hours. I would say my memory was getting there at 8 in the morning, and I would go in the summer, I would go until dusk, and then go outside and do 2 street shows at Starlight Theater, there was this outdoor venue, and I would kind of go out front and kind of perform the stuff that I've been practicing that day. So I was doing like 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then doing 5 shows on Saturday and 5 shows on Sunday in Balboa Park, and couldn't wait to get back to the gym again on Monday. Now I can't even imagine that level of craziness. I remember working on 5 ping pong ball feed where you're
With the
leaning
hands in the
back.
mouth?
Yeah. I remember working on a 7 ping pong ball feed pretty hard, thinking, when I get this down, then I'll send out my tapes to try to get some jobs. I mean, I was so
Yeah, yeah. Not
on,
realizing that the importance of those 2 extra balls was not worth waiting for.
but it mattered to me. It really mattered. Everything had to be super difficult and super advanced. And now I realize that none of this has anything to do with why people hire you and how good your show is. Very few people have any clue. I started doing Boogang. Are you familiar with that prop?
Oh, is that the kind of the spiral looking
Yep. And
prop, like a Aboriginal type of
yeah,
contact? Okay.
staff. It's actually from Japan, the reincarnation. Michael Motion's the first person to kind of reveal the shape, but never really discovered its true magic. And so I'm obsessed with this prop right now as we become obsessed with each prop that we kind of fall in love with.
Sure.
And I've been doing it 4 months, and I'm very good at it already. Because if you compare it to juggling, let's learn a kick up. That's going to take you 2 years.
Yeah, okay.
I could do kick ups with both feet now. I can't do it in the show with both feet. I use my right leg only. But even then, I'm taking a risk on every time that club leaves my hand and has to meet my foot and then meet my hand again. Huge risks happening. You can't drop a Boogang unless you have a heart attack or something.
Sure.
And I'm getting ovations for it. For a trick that I've barely been working on for a few months, and now I'm getting the kind of thing in a show where the applause is too long. You're like, no, you please stop. I have to continue.
Because the visual impression it's leaving on the audience is so strong that...
I think it's just so different than anything else I do in the show. And it's very the way I do it, it's very quiet. I have a lot of lasers and interactive video and robotics and fog and all this attack on the senses. And then I stand there with a single white light from above, a simple piano song, and nothing else. No, just me doing nothing. And I think it is an interesting prop too, but it's fascinating that can succeed so much when I had spent so much time demanding that I'm going to do a whirlwind with 3 clubs and they'll finally like me.
Well, but you've always had a guy who's looking at all the angles. I mean, you're one of the first person people to embrace technology as far as this idea of always staying current. I think a lot of the older guard is just sort of like, oh, I'm still using the same clubs. I'm still using the same even promotion that I did. And yet you were a guy that sort of, did you fall in love with technology, or how did that become possible for you to be such a...
Directly related to the college market, because I would show up at these theaters and I wanted to do a blackout to make this look interesting. They had all these lights that I'd used in review shows, but no one knew how to turn them on, or if they did, I had to train some kid I had to learn the light board and teach him. To have 10 cues would take 3 hours of tech rehearsal. Cueing music was very difficult, so I was always sort of building my own remotes for this. I know Kerry Pollock had a big system, but I always made my own stuff. And so as I moved into review shows, into performing arts centers, I was just amazed at how much time I was wasting getting everything ready. And as I slowly understood how that stuff works, I was like, oh, I want to turn on this backlight with a remote. So I had like an RF remote on my belt for the light, another RF remote to turn on the fans, foot switches to control the music. I literally clanked out on stage, and then slowly learned from production managers and all the people that mentored me that, oh, I could just use this technology. And then so over the years, I've built literally a control system that lets me do, my show has 2,900 cues in it right now.
Okay.
And everything's controlled from my belt.
Right.
So I run all the lights, all the sound, video, automation, MIDI, Touch OSC. There's just all this stuff talking to all the fog machines are controlled. I have things that throw props, catch drop props on the ceiling, Bluetooth stuff. It's this whole thing, and the technology is perfect every show. So I don't even juggle to the music anymore. I juggle to the lights, because the lights are written per throw.
Right.
So they are the 3-ball routine, I think, has 300 light cues in it.
Well, I think that's a really good lesson for the people who are coming today. It's like I was talking to Steve Regatz on the last podcast about how technically juggling improved tremendously. Like you're saying, that the 5-club jugglers, the 7-club jugglers, the length of time they could do it, the difficult tricks like 5-club back crosses that became a lot more common. But as far as the comedy jugglers, it really didn't improve much, like from the 80s, from the Michael Davises and the Edward Jackmans and the Passing Zone and people like that. It wasn't like a lot of improvement has been made. But when you start talking about what you've accomplished, and I think that's so important nowadays, is to come into whether it's a cruise ship or a performing arts center, with what you would call a real show and a real show tech.
Right. But the catch-22 here is you also want to come in and be the easy guy to work with.
Sure.
You can't come into a show and hand somebody a 400-sheet tech rider with all these cues that some guy that has no idea who you are is going to be able to learn or pull off in any situation. So my goal is to make that be invisible to them. So all I do is I simply say, let me see what do you have available? And then we move the bar as far as, are they going to put some colors in the lights for me? But I don't need a human at the show. Once the show begins, I don't need any humans there to trigger anything because it's sort of automated. But you mentioned Michael Davis and Edward. A great comedy juggler at his best doesn't need anything. He just needs a light on stage, 3 balls, and can pull off this amazing performance and doesn't need all that stuff. Now, I do it because I do want to make a theatrical evening out of it so people can come in. There's a sort of a pre-show thing happening. There's a story. There's this whole other kind of thing happening on top of the juggling thing. There's some comedy. And there's just other levels of it, and that's mostly me just playing because I love to play with all my toys and trigger things and have things become a little more than what they can be, but without it making it more complicated for me, making it easier for me.
Well, this idea of being able to control all of your own cues, I think that's why me and Barry went to the wireless system, even just for the music.
Right.
I never did much with the light cues, but you would go in, and even if you had, let's say, 20, 30 cues, you're talking a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours with the sound person.
Right.
And
they'd never get it right.
They'd never get it right. And a lot of times...
Not their fault.
It's hard in a one-night situation, especially when you're not always given the time you need to do the proper tech. But this idea, I mean, like you were saying, just to stand out there by yourself, like on a comedy club stage, or just to be able to have great comedy juggling is the art form itself. But to sort of understand this need to put on a show, to sort of understand what a theatrical show takes and how to mount one, and how to sort of navigate all the different ups and downs this career is thrown at you. And how's your body feeling after all these years? I mean, do you have
That's a great question, Dan.
Any nagging injuries?
I believe we are the same age. Were you born in? Are you younger? I was born in 61.
I was born in 61. I'm December of 1961.
Right, so you're a month younger than me.
Okay.
November. I was doing poorly at one point because I was getting really tight and it just hurt so bad to move around. But my wife is a yoga teacher, and which I actually thought was fine. I just never really thought much about it. And when we moved here to Virginia, I started going sort of begrudgingly, knowing that I could just go show off my incredible skills. And then I would have 15, 75-year-old women kick my butt. And then I was just trying to work so hard to catch up to them. And then eventually I learned that it's not about the race, it's just about your own personal journey. And it's changed my entire body. I got my body back. I'm not in agony anymore. I am more flexible than I've ever been. I do my show and I feel all this extra movement that I never had before. And so I feel really good and very hopeful for the future. I just practiced 2.5 hours today.
Nice.
And felt great. I'm getting a little, I got a little chubbiness going on there. The spandex onesie doesn't quite look so good.
What are you up to, a 30-inch waist or something?
I think I can still get in my tux I got married in.
Nice.
But I did. My daughter was sitting with me at lunch the other day, and I had a button shirt on, and she's like, "Dad, I can see your chest." And I looked down, and yeah, sure enough, the buttons were kind of pulled apart a little bit, and you could see some skin there. So.
And how long do you think? Do you have a sort of a retirement scheme at this point? Is there an age that comes to mind?
Well, 59 and a half, I can access my 401k, which I started when I was 17 after I read the book Financial Planning for Dummies. So I'm cash poor, but when I'm 59 and a half, I'll be able to technically retire, but I don't think I can retire.
Right.
I love what I do. I look forward to every performance that I do. I think about it all the time. I still work on my show every day. Right now, sitting at my desk, I have 2 iPhones. I'm building a way to do live video with iPhones so people can see what I see when I'm juggling. To my right, I have 96 individually addressable LEDs and 2 Arduino units and some Bluetooth MIDI devices that are going to be able to let me hook these up to some props I'm building that will be acceleration controlled. So as they move, the acceleration will change the lighting, things like that. So I'm building all this cool stuff. I got, 45 white boxes behind me that I'm using for another project that I'm working on.
No, that sounds fantastic. I mean, I think you have the best of all the worlds. You're saying that financially you've planned for the future. You have a lovely family. What's family man Mark Nizer like to do?
I like to sit on my porch and drink martinis.
Okay.
That seems to work pretty good. I play with my dog, fly drones. I still hang glide a little bit, but my passion really is still building and inventing new things to perform with. That's really kind of fascinating to me. My oldest daughter is a ballet dancer with the Suzanne Farrell Company at the Kennedy Center in D.C. Middle daughter is a college student, and my youngest daughter is a high school student.
Wow. You've had a great life, a great career in juggling. And I'm going to try to hit you just with some last rapid fire questions to end up our podcast on.
Well, the answers are yes, no, maybe, sometimes, never.
Okay.
So try to do them in that order.
Well, the first one is joggling. Is Mark Nizer ever been a joggler or interested in joggling?
Okay, so where do we draw the line here? I do a thing where I knit while juggling.
Okay.
And I was wondering how many gold medals I could win knitting while juggling.
Is that niggling?
Or blinking my eyes while juggling. No. It should be banned and needs to be stopped as soon as possible.
Yeah, the one that irked me was like when I was in the Guinness Book of World Records, like surfing and juggling. Or now he's skiing and juggling. Or, no.
Really?
Really?
I can sit on the toilet and juggle better than anyone I've ever met. And I'm talking about, I think I did a 5-ball pirouette on the toilet once.
Okay.
That's pretty impressive.
All right, let's go to the others. What about combat? Are you a guy who is into the...
I have done some combat. I remember doing combat with Wes Peden when Shoebox came through town. I don't even think I was in that game because I was too concerned about the insanity of it. And some kid hit his wrist with a club and damaged the tendon, the sheath that goes around the tendon.
Right.
So when he moved his hand up and down, it was agony. It swollen and it really had wrecked it. And he had a show the next night and couldn't have performed. But luckily, a friend of mine is a physician, fired him with a shot of cortisone there and saved him. So it is dangerous. I like it, I guess. I'm more into just practicing, working on my stuff. I do pass clubs quite a bit now, which I never really was interested in, but that's because my friend Tom Hamill, who wrote all this in passing column for magazine, and we actually do a little YouTube channel. He is an idiot savant of passing, and every week he is basically scribbling numbers on napkins and comes in and goes, I think we should try this week, and gives me that feeling of being a kid again, where I'm completely challenged, completely out of my league, and then suddenly it clicks and you get the rush, the juggling rush that we so rarely feel anymore. And it's so great. It's so great.
I remember that rush.
Yeah.
The excitement.
Well, I mean, I get it every Wednesday, Dan.
There you go. And what was the contact with this YouTube channel you were talking about? Is it easy for us to find?
In Passing.
In Passing.
Yeah, if you just Google that, or if you just go to juggler.bz.
My idea of combat changed a little bit when I was at Israel at the Israeli Juggling Festival.
Well, they have to do combat there. I mean, that's kind of part of the training, right?
Exactly. You have to do some military service if you're going to even go to the festival at all.
Yeah.
But had a great time, but they had this thing called Fight Night, International Fight Night, which is more of sort of a one-on-one, mano-a-mano kind of tournament.
Okay.
I have to admit, a little bit more of a fan now that I saw that. I think I was exposed to more of the WJF, sort of zombie juggling or sumo juggling or something like that. What does Mark Nizer think about the WJF? Are you
I am a fan.
You attend those?
I have been to some of them. Jason Garfield to me is this just a creative force to be reckoned with. You know, he's insane, and he'd gladly accept that credo. I'm sure, hearing me say it, and yet I think he's very passionate about what he does, and he's a genius. So I think it's a great idea. I'd love that the more exposure. Hey, we're on ESPN. You know, how do you beat that? The zombie juggling, the Hodges are the greatest zombie combat jugglers I've ever seen. So
okay, the Hodge family.
Oh yeah, they were part of the club for a really long time. He's gone off to school now, but those guys are just they crank out the jugglers. It's just one right after another. You should talk to Chris when you get a chance.
Yeah, I haven't spent too much time with Chris since I don't really go to IJ festivals very much anymore. So I've been kind of out of the loop of the Hodge family. I don't know how many of them went on to become professionals. They were quite good young amateur jugglers.
Yeah, they've all sort of sidetracked from there. Chris was actually part of the circus school up in Quebec City.
Okay,
So not the
I don't know.
Montreal one,
Yeah.
but didn't really actually excelled juggling wise, but didn't quite really integrate well into the group so much. So he is actually getting a degree at VCU in zoology or biology right now.
Well, we've seen a lot come and go. I mean, since our days as the early '80s at the IJA, up through this current time where you're still, like you say, feeling good and excited about juggling. I'm still here. I'm still in juggling.
We've had a lucky run, Dan.
We've had
Just
a pretty
the fact
good run.
I look around at all my friends and I think back to us children playing together and hanging out and just street performing, all of them from the Passing Zone to the Raspini Brothers to just so many people. And most of us have come through it and had a good life from it. Scott and Joan Houghton. I don't know,
They
Jesse
were
and James.
disorderly conduct.
Yeah, they're Jesse and James now. They have a dog
Mhm.
act. They have a beautiful house in Baltimore. Their kids have just had a great life growing up in this thing. We've made something where we were told it couldn't be something. And to me, that passion of living your dream and having that passion, and that's all I try to teach to my children so that they keep playing in their life, keep finding what they like. And I say this in my show even, that if you do find what you love, you're never going to have to go to work. You will want to get up. I have trouble sleeping because I have so many ideas.
Well, what better way to end than with those wonderful words of wisdom? I mean, what a great credo to live your life by. And like you say, we kind of came up through this time that the IGA had real importance. Every time you saw a video of a juggler, it had real importance
Oh, yeah.
because there really wasn't a path that we were following. We were sort of creating it as we went. We all went off in a little bit different divulgence of a degree here or a degree there.
Yeah.
We all kept bumping into each other and seeing how these different people were navigating through this world of juggling. And I have to say, I do think that you've navigated it about as good or even maybe the best of any other juggler
Well,
from
that's
my,
very kind
my
of you, Dan. I
generation.
just feel very lucky, I think, in some ways. Some things lined up in certain ways. I mean, I certainly put in the time too, but I have to say, and since you gave me $400 to say this,
Mhm.
the IJA has been my family. I mean, these guys, from every person I met at the MIT Juggling Club to just all over the world, I know I can go anywhere and say, "Hey, I'm a juggler. Oh, come on over. Here's my house. Here's a key. Drive my car. I'll see you tonight." It's been my family. I love the randomness of the people that it brings together, that we're all brought together by juggling, but no, you can have friends that have all other belief systems or everything. And we just mix together, and I just feel this amazing gift from that I never have experienced in any other sort of world.
Well, we live in good times. I mean,
Yeah.
just to think back and go, I was a professional juggler, or I'm still a professional juggler, and the history of juggling, just kind of the way we can look back and see like the jugglers who we only think of in black and white, then all of a sudden we entered into the world of color. It's like
Well, it
Bobby
was
May to
black and white
Michael
back then, I
Davis was
think.
a big jump.
Right. Oh, he just really did it.
Well, let's end with one thing, Mark. If had to look at the young Mark Nizer and some young juggler starting today, not in the times we came up, but starting today, loves
Hmm.
to juggle, can really resonate with what you're talking about as far as he's found this passion. He wants to
Yeah,
now turn it into a livelihood. Take him aside for a second and give him a little bit of that Mark Nizer wisdom.
I would tell him to go street perform somewhere and find his voice, his unique voice of who he is and what his character is. And I don't even want it to be a fake character. I want him to be whoever he really is, because that experience is going to make you a great performer and a funny performer and make your show more than a guy standing there juggling, doing the same old crap over and over again. So that's what I would do.
So find your true, authentic voice. Get out there, do a ton of shows, and maybe if you're lucky, you could have half the career of my friend Mark Nizer. Thank
Yeah,
you so much
that's
for being on the Drop Everything podcast number 17. The great Mark Nizer. Thank you.
great to be here, and that check better clear.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed Drop Everything podcast number 17. My conversation with the ultra successful, the ultra talented, the ultra man, Mark Nizer. Thanks to our sponsor, the International Jugglers Association, a group I've been involved with for over 30 years. If you want to get involved with this great group of jugglers, find out more at juggle.org. Thanks again to my engineer, Karen Holzman, all the listeners. Thank you so much. And drop everything except when you're juggling.